He threw a gun into the middle of the table and let the gang bosses scramble for it. Ultimately, only the boss who grabbed the gun survived. The man gave him a cell phone. From now on, the plan he had been plotting for a long time could finally be put into action. In South Korea, a highly competitive country, many citizens are under immense pressure, and Jun-hyun, who is preparing for the postgraduate entrance exam, is no exception. He has a weak personality, but on this day, he actually talked back to the teacher in public. After killing someone, Hyun-jun felt an extreme sense of relief. However, that scene just now was only his own fantasy. It turns out that he has mental issues, and goes to a psychologist for counseling, when he really can't control himself. But even so, Hyun-jun still feels out of place with his surroundings. While taking the subway, he saw someone openly selling guns. The foreigner was startled by this scene, but the people around showed no reaction. The gun seller quickly explained that South Korea is a country with strict gun control and this was just a flare gun. The farce ended. Hyun-jun caught a glimpse of a standing pregnant woman, but the priority seat for pregnant women was occupied by an adult male. Hyun-jun wanted the man to give up his seat to the pregnant woman. Unexpectedly, the pregnant woman took the initiative to say she wasn't tired. Hyun-jun knew well that she just didn't want to cause trouble. In the country of South Korea, it seems that everyone has been enduring all the time. After returning to the postgraduate exam apartment, Hyun-jun continued studying, but lewd sounds came from the next room, making it impossible for him to concentrate, and the most infuriating thing was that the neighbor often stole his side dishes. They were carefully made by Hyun-jun's mother. He immediately went to the apartment manager to argue, but the manager acted as if he hadn't heard. Hyun-jun then went to confront the neighbor. Not only did the neighbor refuse to admit it, but he even beat Hyun-jun up. Humiliated by this great insult, he went back to his room, took out a guitar case, and inside was actually a submachine gun. He loaded it and aimed at the next room. However, thinking of his mother who worked hard to support him, Hyun-jun finally put down the gun. On the other side, when the landlady came to collect rent, she found the door unlocked, entered the room, and smelled a pungent stench. Looking up, she unexpectedly saw a corpse. The police quickly arrived, cordoned off the scene, and surprisingly found many bullets in the deceased's pocket. It seems this case isn't that simple. The detective immediately asked the experienced patrol officer Woo-shin to assist in the investigation. Woo-shin was once a special forces soldier in the military. He could tell at a glance that all these bullets were large caliber. Even in the military, few people used them. He then asked for details of the case. However, the detective said they had found nothing. It was at this moment that Woo-shin noticed something seemed wrong with the corner of the ceiling. The case immediately escalated. As a patrol officer, Woo-shin couldn't get involved either. He had a meal with his senior, Jason, who was now the police station chief. They also talked about this matter. Jason warned him to know his limits and everything, and told Woo-shin to hurry up and take the promotion exam. With his ability, he could even be a sergeant, but Woo-shin seemed uninterested in this, and only wanted to be a patrol officer living a stable life. At the same time, the creepy man Hank heard a knock on the next door, and lied that he had called for repair services. He tricked the female worker into his home, and as she was working, he slowly approached, staring intently at her body. At this moment, the female worker accidentally caught a glimpse of Hank's electronic ankle monitor, and felt something was wrong. In South Korea, only serious criminals like rapists are forced to wear ankle monitors. The female worker hurriedly packed up her tools, wanting to leave this troubled place, but how could Hank let her leave so easily? At this moment, Woo-shin and his colleague arrived in time, and the female worker narrowly escaped. It turned out that Hank was one of the criminals under Woo-shin's supervision. Woo-shin knew this guy wasn't honest, so he would come to visit him when he had nothing to do. At this moment, having failed, Hank flew into a rage, and wanted to take his anger out on the new young patrol officer. Fortunately, Woo-shin arrived in time and subdued Hank with a shoulder throw. This district was very peaceful and harmonious under his management. However, under the peaceful surface, undercurrents are surging. Hyun-jun heard the noise from next door again. He finally couldn't stand it and told the other party to behave properly. The neighbor became more and more excessive, and even mocked Hyun-jun as a bookworm, and that he could never have a girlfriend. Upon hearing this, Hyun-jun completely lost his mind, directly raised the gun at the wall and pulled the trigger. The surviving woman was so scared that she immediately called the police. Hyun-jun picked at the wall, and told the police operator frankly that he was killing people. At this moment, the neighbor who had stolen the side dishes stomped out, cursing. Seeing the neighbor begging for mercy on the ground like a dog, Hyun-jun became even more excited. He walked to the management office, and shot the apartment manager dead with a single bullet. Then he killed his most hated neighbor. But Hyun-jun had no intention of stopping. he locked the apartment doors, and an indiscriminate massacre officially began. When the police arrived, the apartment was already littered with corpses. They cautiously broke in and successfully found Hyun-jun, asking him to lay down his weapons, but Hyun-jun had completely gone crazy, shooting with his gun. The police couldn't withstand his firepower and had to retreat temporarily. When Woo-shin arrived, he told the officers to stand by at the door, and entered the apartment alone to assess the situation. After confirming Hyun-jun's weapon, build, and location, Woo-shin and his colleagues immediately took action. He first cut off the power, then took the initiative to show himself to attract Hyun-jun's attention, and waste his bullets. His colleagues took the opportunity to evacuate the trapped examinees. Hyun-jun flew into a rage, insisting on killing everyone in the apartment. Woo-shin didn't hesitate, rushed towards Hyun-jun, and completely subdued him. Woo-shin didn't need to handle the aftermath. He slowly walked into Hyun-jun's room. Looking at the exercise books on the desk and the holes in the wall, Woo-shin instantly understood Hyun-jun's motive for killing. While he was sighing, he suddenly felt that the bedboard was unusual. Lifting it up, he found all kinds of gun parts inside. Back at the police station, the officers looked at each other in dismay. None of them had seen these fully automatic rifles before. The chief told the officers to call in military personnel for identification. The detective said, "Aren't we already got an expert here?" However, the chief expressed doubt about Woo-shin's professional skills. To solve the case quickly, Woo-shin first assembled all the parts, then introduced each weapon model to everyone. There was the Colt Model 629 assault rifle used by U.S. Special Forces, the AK-47 automatic rifle produced by the former Soviet Union, and the German-made MP5 submachine gun. Why would these terrifying weapons appear under an examinee's bed? At this moment, Woo-shin remembered the bullets found at the crime scene a few days ago. Those bullets were fully compatible with these guns. He suspected a connection between the two cases. As soon as Hyun-jun's injuries improved slightly, Woo-shin interrogated him, but he claimed he had no money to buy guns, saying the weapons he used were sent to him by others via courier. Woo-shin was skeptical. These guns were valuable. Who would send weapons smuggled in with great effort to a stranger? But Hyun-jun said there were more guns than just those in his possession, and many others outside had gotten their hands on guns. After the interrogation, the officers all thought Hyun-jun was lying. After all, he had a history of mental illness, but Woo-shin wasn't willing to give up any clues. He took the rookie officer back to the crime scene from a few days ago, trying to find missed clues, but found nothing. Could it be that Hyun-jun was really lying? If he was lying, where on earth did the guns come from? On the other side, Hank was pointed at and whispered about by old ladies. While shopping in the supermarket, he wanted to kill them but had no suitable weapon to hand. When he got home, Hank tripped over the pile of express boxes outside his house. He opened them and found that they contained gun parts. Hank got very excited and started assembling the guns. Judging from Hank's movements, he must have performed well during his military service. Hank ran to a nearby hill to practice shooting, and found he hadn't forgotten his skills. He fired wildly at the front. A terrifying thought took root in his heart. At the same time, subordinates of gang leader Minister Kong dragged out club owner Jesse. After forcing him to sign the transfer agreement, logistics staff Youngman immediately started to deal with Jesse, but Minister Kong's subordinates were arrogant, clearly looking down on Youngman and the others. Although Youngman was somewhat angry, he had to swallow his anger. When they were about to act, Jesse and the sack hurriedly begged for mercy. He also said that after his death, Minister Kong wouldn't hand over the club to Youngman to manage. He had hidden many guns in the warehouse, which could help Youngman take over the club. Youngman didn't believe it at first. At this moment, Minister Kong called. Youngman cautiously asked who would get the club after the incident. However, Minister Kong directly brushed it off, but Youngman still had a glimmer of hope for him in his heart. Yet he had to let Jesse go, so he only knocked Jesse unconscious. Later, he found an opportunity to ask Minister Kong about the club again. Minister Kong, somewhat annoyed by the questioning, directly told the truth that he would not give the club to Youngman. Hearing this, Youngman was disillusioned. He then took his underlings to search Jesse's car, and actually found a gun in the trunk. At this moment, Woo-shin was repeatedly recalling Hyun-jun's words, and decided to visit the area near the postgraduate exam apartment, to ask residents about the couriers, but saw a group of people rummaging through cardboard boxes. After driving them away, Woo-shin re-examined the cardboard boxes, and felt one of them looked familiar. After thinking carefully, he realized it was similar to the express box at Hank's store. Woo-shin immediately informed his colleagues of this news, but learned that his colleagues were chasing Hank. Woo-shin hurried to Hank's house. His colleagues also forced a taxi to stop. However, there was no sign of Hank in the car. The driver said the man had just gotten off. The police officer also found Hank's electronic ankle monitor in the car. Meanwhile, Woo-shin had already arrived at Hank's apartment. He cautiously opened the door and easily subdued the man inside. But the man wasn't Hank. He claimed to be GM Ryan and had received an express box a few days ago. It was full of bullets but no gun, and there was also an address book. he followed the address on it to come here, wanting to see if there were any guns in Hank's house, but saw a man slip out. Upon hearing this, Wushin took out a photo of Hank. Ryan said it was this man. He left in a hurry, not even closing the door. Wushin then called his colleagues, and also learned that Hank had escaped. Now that things have come to this, he had to ask the surveillance department to do their utmost to search for the man's whereabouts. At this moment, a figure suddenly flashed past the door. Wushin and Ryan immediately became alert. The next second, the two started chasing the mysterious person fiercely, and finally managed to intercept them at the corner. At this moment, the police found Hank's whereabouts. Wushin had to tie Mike to a telephone pole and let his colleagues deal with him, while he himself and Ryan tracked Hank. Ryan was an excellent driver, and with the help of the police, the two kept closing in on Hank. But just as they reached the city center and were about to catch Hank, he suddenly walked into a blind spot of the surveillance and disappeared. Wushin and his companion got out of the car to ask passersby, when Wushin suddenly remembered there were no surveillance cameras near the police station, and Hank had once said he would retaliate against those who arrested him. Wushin immediately called the chief to warn him that a dangerous person was approaching the police station. But when Wushin arrived at the police station, gunshots suddenly rang out. Wushin still didn't trust Ryan, so he cuffed him, then rushed into the police station with the chief. But Hank had already started killing, and Wushin tried to persuade him to put down the gun, but the guy was mentally unstable and without a word, raised his gun and fired. The rifle in his hand was extremely powerful, so Wushin and the chief had to step back temporarily. The two, along with the remaining officers, tried to figure out a way, and the police station now had the guns seized from Hyun-jun, and Ryan's car happened to have matching bullets, so they discussed it. Wushin decided to distract attention himself, while the chief led people to evacuate to a safe area, and fetch guns and ammunition. At first, everything went smoothly, but when the chief was leading people to evacuate, he accidentally stepped on broken glass. Hank instantly became alert and shot the chief who had arrested him, throwing the plan into disarray. Wushin had to rush back to the car to get bullets, then find a gun to load, but just after loading it, Wushin was reminded of his past military service. It turned out that after retiring, he had developed severe PTSD. At this moment, Hank followed the blood trail and found the chief, and seeing he was powerless to resist, Hank began mocking him wildly, planning to torture the chief to death slowly. But the female officer, who had been hiding, took the opportunity to shoot, but her shooting skills were lacking, and the grazed Hank flew into a rage, raised his gun and fired wildly. Fortunately, Wushin regained his composure in time, moved decisively and shot Hank in the leg. Hank tried to stand up to fight back but was shot again by Wushin. Seeing no chance, Hank had to surrender his gun, but when Wushin approached to check on him, he tried to take Wushin down with him. However, Wushin accurately shot him twice, killing the heinous criminal. But this scene was captured by reporter Jung Ji-ai. A shootout between police and a rapist at the police station was big news, and once the news was reported, public opinion exploded. Superiors launched an investigation into Wushin and brought up his military career. It turned out that Wushin had volunteered to carry out missions in high-risk areas, and ended up shooting 99 people. Superiors reasonably suspected he had anti-human tendencies, and Wushin's memories were pulled back to his childhood. He had witnessed his entire family being killed, but fortunately, police station chief Jason took care of him. But while Jason was hanging clothes, he picked up a pistol and aimed it at the murderer. Jason quickly persuaded him, and he finally put down the gun. Back to the present, the chief pushed open the door, interrupting the questioning and Wushin's memories. He bailed Wushin out, but under pressure from superiors, Wushin was still suspended for 3 months. However, Wushin didn't give up the investigation. He went to the police station to check the surveillance near Hank's house on the night of the incident, and found that Mike, whom he had tied to the telephone pole, had been rescued by a group of people, and the officer familiar with the area recognized at a glance. Mike was a well-known thug in the area, and a subordinate of gang leader Minister Kong. After getting this information, Wushin took action immediately. Before leaving, he asked the rookie to help check on Ryan. After arriving at Minister Kong's territory, his underlings surrounded Wushin, but he didn't act rashly, and Minister Kong told his men to disperse. Wushin got straight to the point, and asked if he had touched any guns recently, and Minister Kong couldn't help laughing out loud.
저게 총인지.
In South Korea, even gangs dare not touch guns. Wushin pulled out a photo of Mike and asked if he knew him. However, Mike had always worked under Youngman, and Minister Kong really didn't know him. Seeing it was pointless to keep asking, Wushin got up and left. Wushin then went to Dongwol Company where Ryan worked, to inquire about his whereabouts, but it would take time to find out Ryan's specific information. Wushin directly invited Ryan out for a meal. Faced with Wushin's questioning, Ryan admitted that although South Korea has strict gun control, it is a major exporter of bullets, and Dongwol is precisely South Korea's largest military supplies company. Upon hearing this, Wushin fell silent for a moment. Then he asked what he planned to do after getting a gun. Ryan, not beating around the bush, frankly said he had cancer. The doctor told him he had only 6 months left to live. Ryan didn't want to be full of tubes all over his body. He just wanted to find a gun to commit suicide. So, he searched online and found someone providing guns for free, so he filled in his address. Unexpectedly, a few days later, he really received a box of bullets and that address book. But now that website has been shut down. Upon hearing this, Wushin asked him to write down the names in the address book on paper. But Wushin saw the name of an acquaintance. Anxious, he immediately got up and left. At the same time, young man and others were discussing how to take down Minister Kong. The next second, Jesse turned around and suggested that young men collect a large number of guns, according to the address book. This way, they would have the confidence to confront Minister Kong. After a moment, young men finally decided to start looking for guns. The underlings immediately set off. At this moment, an ant forced an unscrupulous boss's car to stop. It turned out that the ant's son worked overtime every day, and the boss not only didn't pay overtime, but also made him keep working. Eventually, the man was cut in half by a machine due to over-fatigue. The ant had held a sign to protest at the company gate, but no one paid attention to her. Only Wushin often went to visit her and would take her home. In fact, the ant only wanted an apology from the boss. But the other party didn't care and even told the driver to just run her over. Completely disappointed, the ant pulled out a gun from her arms. It was a delivery she received a few days ago. The ant fired several shots at the car. The driver was scared out of his wits. The boss also changed from his earlier arrogant demeanor and lay on the ground to apologize. After killing the unscrupulous boss, Auntie dialed Wushin's phone number and told him the whole story. When Wushin learned that she had received a gun and even killed someone, his heart tightened. He told Auntie to go home first and that he would rush over there immediately. After returning home, Auntie first lit an incense stick for her son. The next second, a sudden knock on the door rang out. Auntie, thinking it was Wushin coming, opened the door without hesitation. But the person who came was actually Mike, who was looking for guns according to the address book. When Wushin arrived at the private house, he found the door unlocked, and Auntie was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, the thugs rushed out. Mike even shouted and took a photo of Wushin, then pulled out a gun and pointed it at him. The thugs had never seen such a scene, and were scared out of their wits for a moment. Wushin didn't want to kill anyone, so he unloaded the live ammunition. The thugs still thought they had a chance, but were all taken down in a few moves. Wushin found the dying ant in the wardrobe, but the thugs from earlier stood up again. Wushin needed to deal with them quickly, and at this moment, Ryan, who had arrived, was playing a cat-and-mouse game with the thugs outside. Finally getting bored, he simply took action directly and easily dealt with the thugs. Inside the house, Mike had his arm broken by Wushin, and the thugs who came rushing over were no match either. After dealing with things inside the house, Wushin carried Auntie to Ryan's car, then rushed to the hospital at top speed. Watching Auntie being wheeled into the emergency room, Wushin finally let out a sigh of relief. But the next second, the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. So he went to settle the score with Minister Kong, whether he knew about it or not. After all, Mike was his subordinate, and Minister Kong had to take responsibility for this, but he himself wasn't there, so his subordinates suffered the consequences. At the same time, the detective colleagues arrived at the hospital, and under Wushin's guidance, found the address book in Mike's pocket. The colleague then met with Wushin, took the address book and checked, and sure enough, Auntie's address was on it. Wushin analyzed that the shooting incidents that have occurred so far are by no means random, but organized crimes. Someone is using couriers to send guns to those who are dissatisfied with the world or oppressed, intending to make them resist with guns, and putting the address book in the courier box is to let those who receive the courier know that others have also received guns. If there is a large demand for crimes, they will take the initiative to find people in the address book to get guns. The person behind the scenes also implanted malicious software in the phone of the gun recipient, so that all their information can be seen. No courier records can be found online either. The chief immediately ordered to confiscate all guns according to the address book. At the same time, the rookie told Wushin that the Dongwool company where Ryan worked is indeed a state-certified military supplies enterprise, but Ryan resigned last year, citing cancer as the reason for being unable to continue working. After hearing this, Wushin had a clear idea. After returning to the hospital, Wushin was somewhat moved to see Ryan still guarding in front of the operating room. Fortunately, Auntie's surgery was successfully completed, while the doctor was telling Wushin the precautions. Ryan quietly said thank you to Auntie. At this time, the news was full of reports about the shooting incidents, and Wushin couldn't help but say that guns are too terrifying. He told a story he heard while in the army. Someone deliberately fired a gun in a village square, then left the gun there. After that, the peaceful village became chaotic, with people shot dead everywhere. The villagers no longer trusted each other, and fought fiercely over that gun, getting badly hurt. At this moment, a gun-selling store suddenly appeared. People then lined up in a long queue in front of the store, and the store owner was exactly the man who had fired the gun in the square. It was said that he was an Asian with blue eyes. Wushin believed that a gun is neither justice nor power. It will only make people destroy each other. Wushin advised GM Ryan to stop looking for guns, and cherish the remaining time. While the two were chatting, Young Man arrived at the hospital with his men, and learned that Mike was seriously injured. Staring at Wushin's photo, Young Man was furious and vowed to avenge his underling. He happened to run into Wushin and the other in the elevator. GM Ryan noticed Young Man's subtle movements, but didn't remind Wushin. He just stood between the two. After watching Wushin leave, GM Ryan turned around and walked towards the parking lot.
Yes, sir.
Unexpectedly, GM Ryan was actually a gang boss, and all the express deliveries of guns and ammunition in the city came from him. David reminded GM Ryan that the situation has been tense recently, and told him not to act rashly anymore. The people above have already been displeased. However, GM Ryan directly killed him. Years of miserable life have long made him cold-blooded and ruthless. GM Ryan was sent to an orphanage by his mother as a child. A staff member took him over. But once GM Ryan's mother walked far away, the staff member carried him into the car. It turned out that the woman was a human trafficker. They were a gang specializing in abducting and trafficking children. When the children grow up, they harvest their organs and sell them. By the time GM Ryan was 5, his eyes had been harvested. Later, he was taken to the United States to have all his organs harvested. Fortunately, the police timely raided the den, and GM Ryan managed to save his life. After growing up, GM Ryan, seeking revenge, went into the enemy camp alone. He killed the doctor, who was going to perform the organ harvesting surgery on him. Although he was seriously injured, he thus gained the appreciation of Jack, AU's gang boss, who intended to groom him as his heir, and replaced his injured eye with a blue one. From then on, GM Ryan's life revolved around training and missions, and he became a top assassin, and the blue-eyed Asian that Wushin mentioned was none other than him. He just always wore colored contact lenses to hide it in front of Wushin. GM Ryan once discussed with Jack that in South Korea, because men are required to serve in the military, half of the population knows how to use guns, and the people generally face high pressure and frequent mental issues, so it would only take a little incitement to plunge the country into chaos, thus promoting their gun-selling plan. However, GM Ryan's real purpose was to retaliate against the country that had hurt him. He specifically targeted people who had long been oppressed, and students Jaehyun and Jim were the perfect choices. Jaehyun was the #1 target of the school bullies, and Jim, being Jaehyun's good friend, the bullies wouldn't let him off either. Under the coercion of the bullies, they had to secretly take photos of girls. The bullies even made Jaehyun steal his mother's ID card to take out a loan shark. But upon seeing her working hard, Jaehyun still didn't take it. But the bullies didn't care about that and kept bullying Jaehyun. The day Jaehyun just got home, the bullies sent him a message insulting his dearest mother. Jaehyun went out to clear his head, and at this moment, a courier delivered a package. Jaehyun opened it and saw it was a Scorpion submachine gun inside. The gun seemed to give Jaehyun courage, and for the first time, he fought back against the bullies' insults. During class, a bully slashed his clothes, and Jaehyun, unable to bear it any longer, suddenly stood up, cursed the bully, and told him to get lost. Under the teacher's gaze, the bully didn't make a move. At night, Jaehyun and Jim gathered for a meal, and he encouraged Jim to fight back bravely. At this moment, a group of thugs started fighting not far away, and GM Ryan happened to be there. He went to the shooting range upstairs, took out an air gun, and quickly controlled the situation. After the farce ended, he left in style, and Jaehyun hurriedly stopped GM Ryan, wanting him to teach him how to shoot. However, this was exactly what GM Ryan wanted. It turned out that the farce just now was all his plan. It was to attract Jaehyun and Jim's attention, so as to guide them to take revenge. Sure enough, the next day, Jaehyun put the gun in his backpack. During recess, some students noticed that all the entrances and exits of the building were locked. At this moment, Jaehyun saw Jim being bullied. Unable to bear it any longer, he prepared to take out the gun and kill them. Unexpectedly, the gun in the bag had disappeared. The next second, the school bullies and others approached slowly with guns in hand. It turned out that they had searched Jaehyun's school bag and mistaken the real gun for a toy. At the same time, Minister Kong, having found out that Mike was Young Man's man, directly slapped Young Man, questioning him if he had been dealing with guns recently, but Young Man could only stubbornly deny it. Minister Kong, out of years of friendship, let Young Man off the hook, but he still felt something was wrong, so he asked his men to bring Jesse's phone. At this moment, GM Ryan called and remotely opened Jesse's warehouse. The warehouse was full of express boxes. Minister Kong opened one and found it was a gun. It turned out that GM Ryan had previously collaborated with Jesse, and these guns were supposed to be spread by Jesse, but now he had been caught by Minister Kong. so GM Ryan had to seek cooperation with Minister Kong. GM Ryan reminded him that young man had already started collecting guns, and it was obvious what he was up to. With that, GM Ryan hung up the phone, then immediately found Wushin, and pretendingly gave him a copy of the address book, reminding him that a high school student had also received a gun. Everyone then rushed to the school, while Wushin called the school teacher, asking them to note down the high school student's phone number, and quickly find out who he was. At this moment, the school bullies were bullying Jaehyun and even wanted to shoot directly, when suddenly the gun misfired and shattered the glass. The school bully then realized the magazine was filled with steel balls. He flew into a rage and kicked Jaehyun violently. At this moment, the teacher had found out that the student with the gun was Jim, and Jim had already started acting. Listening to the bully's pleas for mercy, Jim's heart didn't waver at all. He walked out of the classroom and fired wildly at the students, those who had bullied him, those who had stood by and done nothing. Whether they were students or teachers, they all had to die. Jim found Jaehyun and handed him a gun. He had locked all entrances and exits and invited Jaehyun to join the hunt. With that, he walked out of the classroom and started a new round of slaughter. At the same time, Wushin and GM Ryan arrived at the school, smashed the glass, and rescued a group of students. Looking at the blood on the ground, Wushin immediately quickened his movements. At this moment, everyone in the school was frantically fleeing for their lives. They hid in the library and blocked the door with bookshelves, but it couldn't withstand Jim's single shotgun blast. He walked into the library, and told the school bullies who had bullied him to get out, and told the other students to reveal their locations. Now Jim only wanted to kill the ringleaders. Finally, a student couldn't withstand the pressure, and revealed the bully's location. Jim blasted away at the bullies. Just as he was about to execute the bullies, Wushin rushed over in time and subdued Jim. The bullies tried to slip away while they could. At this moment, gunfire rang out again. Jaehyun pointed a gun at the school bully who had been bullying him. The bully kept begging for mercy, which only stirred Jaehyun's desire to kill, but he was still hesitating, and Wushin hurriedly persuaded Jaehyun to put down the gun.
이해하는 척하지 마요. 늦었어요.
Wushin was all too familiar with this scene. Under his gentle persuasion, Jaehyun still put down the gun. The school bully managed to survive. The shooting incident came to an end here. Jim and Jaehyun were taken away by the police, but Jaehyun hadn't killed anyone. He still had a future. Seeing his anxious mother, Jaehyun was grateful that he hadn't pulled the trigger. It was at this moment that Wushin ordered the arrest of GM Ryan. It turned out he had never stopped investigating, and had found out that GM Ryan was the mastermind. But the next second, GM Ryan suddenly vanished into the crowd. At this time, shooting incidents occurred not only at the school, but also in various parts of South Korea. Public opinion was in an uproar. All the pressure fell on the police. The chief ordered the officers to speed up, and collect guns door to door according to the address book, and also told Wushin to return to duty and join the front line. Took out a guitar case. At this moment, Minister Kong suddenly called. He handed over all the guns in Jesse's warehouse, and told Wushin that young man was out everywhere getting guns. He wanted to cooperate with the police to catch young man. Although Wushin knew the other party had ulterior motives, it was still a good opportunity, so he agreed to cooperate. Minister Kong then found young man, and told him to cut off all of Jesse's fingers. Seeing young man nod in agreement, Minister Kong left with relief. In fact, this was his plan. When young man returned with Jesse's fingers to report, the police lying in wait at the club would arrest him. However, what Minister Kong didn't expect was that young man didn't kill Jesse. The next day, young man had his underlings dig a grave, pretended to cut off the fingers, then went to the bathhouse together. At this moment, Minister Kong's subordinates walked in, sharply urging young man to report back to Minister Kong immediately, and arrogantly told him to turn on the hot water before leaving. Young man did as told. The police in charge of tracking saw young man's car start, and notified the police keeping watch at the club. Soon, young man arrived at the club to report, but he startled Minister Kong. The person who came was Jesse, who had come back from the dead. It turned out that the previous day, young man had told Jesse everything Minister Kong had said, and even gave him a gun, telling him to go settle the score with Minister Kong. Looking at Minister Kong, who had seized his property, Jesse immediately fired, and the two engaged in a head-on shootout. At this moment, young man and his underlings picked up their guns, and killed Minister Kong's subordinates who looked down on them. Then they took all the gang's money with their underlings, and even called the dying Minister Kong to humiliate him. By the time the police rushed into the club building, Jesse and Minister Kong had already stopped breathing. However, young man didn't get away scot-free. After he returned to his stronghold, Wushin also arrived there. Although the thugs had guns, Wushin was a top marksman, and took down most of them in less than 5 minutes. Seeing the situation was bad, young man hurriedly retreated with the remaining men. Wushin immediately ran to the roof, confirmed the vehicle's position, adjusted the high-powered scope, held his breath, and aimed at the target. Wu Xin shot. Again, wounding Young Man. Ultimately, Young Man and his group were controlled by the arriving police. This infighting gang farce had no winners. However, the crisis is far from over. Jian Ryan, still wanting to cause more trouble, found reporter Zheng Ji and told him to track and film the upcoming shooting incidents in full. At this moment, the CIA has already found out South Korea's recent shooting incidents are all related to an organization called the International Rifle Union. This organization is known for selling weapons on the black market, and the East Asian with blue eyes is the head of the Asian division. At this moment, GM Ryan directly hacked into the police station system and took the initiative to tell Wu Xin something big is about to happen at 27 Baekju Road. With that, he hung up the phone. Wu Xin checked the surveillance. A car was parked near 27 Baekju Road, and the owner of the car was none other than police station chief Jason. Just a few hours ago, his only daughter committed suicide. Jason walked into the mortuary in a daze. He looked at his daughter's body, too distraught to speak for a moment. His daughter had mentioned to him that she wanted to buy an apartment closer to her company. For this, she spent all her savings. Jason even withdrew his pension in advance to help his daughter, but as soon as she paid the money, the intermediary company immediately showed its true colors, even though several people had been driven to death by them. South Korean law couldn't convict this group of people. His daughter couldn't accept this result and, in a moment of despair, did something foolish. Jason took a glance at his daughter's photo, picked up the pistol in the express box, and walked into the KTV where the fraud gang was celebrating. He told the group to apologize to his daughter's portrait, but they remained arrogant, constantly insulting and shoving Jason. Jason directly drew his gun and killed one of the bastards. The fraud leader hurriedly used a woman as a threat and escaped from the KTV under the cover of his accomplices, but he was also injured. Jason fired a shot into the air to scare away passers-by, then aimed his gun at the target again. Just as he was about to pull the trigger, a large number of police officers arrived at the scene and sternly warned him that if he dared to shoot, he would be shot dead on the spot. At this moment, Wu Xin arrived just in time, but the usually kind Jason told him not to come closer. The law can't solve his problem. He must kill the fraud leader. Wu Xin brought up the incident from back then. He once wanted to kill the criminal who killed his parents. It was because of Jason's words that Wu Xin didn't pull the trigger. Hearing this, Jason was finally moved and slowly put down the gun.
내가 원하는 건 이런 게 아닌데.
He immediately led his men into the scene and started shooting directly. Jason was shot multiple times while protecting Wu Xin and finally stopped breathing. Wu Xin wanted to tear GM Ryan apart with his own hands, but the other party fired again. However, he didn't kill Wu Xin. Instead, he announced to the live streaming camera that he was behind all the recent shooting incidents. From now on, South Korea is no longer a gun-free country. Everyone who wants a gun can receive one. In no time, people flocked to the website to claim guns. Some started live streams to demonstrate how to use them. Others openly sold guns. On the subway, a host of problems followed one after another. The man was accidentally killed by his daughter's toy gun right after getting off work. People were panic-stricken. The public was also divided into two camps. One camp advocated abolishing the gun ban, the other firmly supported the gun control law. There were daily protests on the streets. The government was also thrown into chaos. GM Ryan was very satisfied with this scene, and told his men to continue increasing gun distribution. He then gathered all the gang leaders in South Korea. GM Ryan slowly walked to the table. One leader, seeing he was young, spoke arrogantly and was shot dead by GM Ryan with one bullet. GM Ryan told the leaders he was looking for a partner. Whoever could snatch the gun would be his partner. Then he threw the gun on the table. The man with a mustache successfully grabbed the pistol, but pointed it at GM Ryan, wanting to take down this arrogant guy. But there were no bullets in the gun. The next second, GM Ryan's bodyguards moved into action simultaneously. Everyone except the mustachioed man was killed. He gave the mustachioed man a phone, and told him to keep in contact at all times. At this moment, conflicts among the public intensified, with each side sticking to their own arguments. The camp wanting to abolish the gun law was very radical, and had their reasons. In South Korea, all walks of life are filled with bullying, and countless people are living in dire straits, so they must have weapons to resist. Female nurse Ji-woo was a victim of bullying. She had good grades but, coming from a poor family, attended a second-rate university, and was ostracized by colleagues all day. Moreover, Ji-woo didn't know how to curry favor with the head nurse, so her colleagues became more arrogant. That day, colleagues asked Ji-woo, who had been working night shifts, to handle a pile of documents. While washing her hands, Ji-woo saw her haggard reflection in the mirror, and took out the express box from the cabinet. On the other side, Wu Xin held a funeral for Jason as soon as he recovered from his injuries. Colleagues told him everything that had happened recently. After seeing Jason off, Wu Xin went to the demonstration square to help colleagues maintain order. At this moment, GM Ryan suddenly called, and the two met immediately. Seeing GM Ryan was surrounded by fully armed bodyguards, Wushin knew a head-on confrontation wouldn't end well, so he only asked in a deep voice what the other party really wanted. In fact, GM Ryan initially only wanted to use Han Jun, but Wushin suddenly appeared. So GM Ryan investigated his background and came up with a terrifying idea. He wanted Wushin to completely lose faith in South Korea and cooperate with him. But Wushin stood firm. GM Ryan told Wushin that in a world where the strong prey on the weak, only guns can protect oneself. Listening to GM Ryan's fallacies, Wushin didn't want to argue with him. GM Ryan also didn't want to waste words. Let the people choose for themselves. At this moment, a large truck suddenly crashed into the demonstration crowd. GM Ryan shouted through the speakers in the truck, "All the boxes are full of guns. Whoever needs one can take it." The demonstration crowd instantly fell into madness. Some wanted to use guns to kill those who bullied them. Others, wanting to protect themselves, also joined in the scramble. The scene immediately became extremely chaotic. The police couldn't control the situation, and this was exactly the result GM Ryan wanted. At the same time, Wushin also started his counterattack. He did his best to take down the bodyguards, then got off the elevator. The square was a hellish scene. People fought fiercely over guns, even aiming at the police. GM Ryan told Jung Ji-I to film carefully and record this wonderful scene, while he and his men deployed a large number of smoke grenades. To make the scene more chaotic, in an environment with poor visibility, people become more panicked. At this point, as long as someone fires the first shot, more people will shoot in self-defense. Jung Ji-I thought GM Ryan was going to fire the first shot, but unexpectedly, the first shot wasn't fired by him. Instead, GM Ryan was the first one to be hit. The gunshot amplified the people's inner panic to the extreme. Everyone thought someone was shooting at them. A large-scale melee broke out instantly. At this moment, as GM Ryan looked at the hellish scene before him, a relieved smile appeared on his face. Wushin had no time to pay attention to GM Ryan. He saw a confused child rush in front of someone despite the hail of bullets, hugged him tightly and protected him. And this scene was also broadcast live online. The public talked a lot after seeing it. Although the world is like purgatory, there are always people changing the status quo. Ji-woo also saw the scene. She silently put away the pistol in her arms. The chaos was quickly quelled by the arriving special police. In the evening, people spontaneously came to the square to mourn. They still believed the world would get better. The next day, the police were collecting guns in the square. People handed over their guns one after another. Ji-woo was among them. But Jung Ji-I remained unrepentant. He threatened the publisher that if they forced changes to his report, he would switch to another publisher. Hardly had he finished speaking, a cleaner walked in. She raised a gun directly, because the public had been incited by Jung Ji-I's news. Before Jung Ji-I could explain, the cleaner had already fired. On the other side, although GM Ryan was unconscious, Jack's black market business continued. But the failed GM Ryan was now worthless, and a female assassin had already arrived at the ward. On the other side, Auntie's condition is gradually improving. Wushin came to the hospital to visit her, and it's expected that she will be discharged from the hospital soon. Later, Wushin went to the school gate to pick up the boy he had saved. The drama ends here. This drama has a bold setting, bringing the plot of illegal firearms flowing into South Korea to the screen, thus drawing out various abnormal social issues, school bullying, workplace harassment, and various frauds. These incidents happen all the time, but no matter how bad the world is, there are always people mending the cracks. Even if one person's strength is weak, as long as someone stands up, thousands will follow. Violence can never solve real dilemmas. If guns are not prohibited, when people point guns at others, the other party's gun will also be pointed at them. After the square riot, many people handed over the guns they had received. However, not everyone will hand them over, and a large number of guns are still in the hands of the people. South Korea, which seems to have calmed down, is actually surging with undercurrents. If real social problems are not solved, these guns will sooner or later be a time bomb. The director may also have the idea of making a second season. Today's commentary ends here. Thank you all for watching. Friends who like it, please subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time.